Alright, hey everybody, welcome back to my build that I'm doing on my computer desk case build. So as you can see, I've done a little bit of work here. Now these sides aren't actually glued and screwed down yet. Went a little Japanese for a second there, glued and screwed. No, they're not glued and screwed down yet, but they will be soon. As you can see though, I have gone ahead and drained my old computer case, the liquid cooling system, and I'm taking everything out of it. So there's my actual pieces and parts that I have here. So my GTX 1080 Strix version. Man, that's hard to say. So there's that. I got the Maximus 9 Formula motherboard with the heatsink removed for the moment. I've also got all my different fans and water cooling accessories, like my radiators here organized as well. They're not quite as easy to see, so I'll tilt in there so you can get a better view. So there's one radiator without a fan on it right now. Yeah, I'm gonna readjust. There we go. I've got my pump here, which is, like I said, is this nice beefy PMP 500, real powerful pump, but it's got a bit of a noise to it, so I still need to create sort of a baffle box to it. And then I've got it connected up to a nice, I think this was a 200 millimeter reservoir, so pretty good sized reservoir, because it's a little bit overkill, to be honest. I did used to have a much bigger loop with 2 video cards that were also part of it, but now I've just got the motherboard and the processor that are being water cooled, so I don't need quite as much. And really the radiators I'm using are probably maybe a little bit overkill, but like I said, I need that positive pressure, so as long as I'm going to be drawing the air in, I might as well be, you know, pushing it out, pushing a little less out. So, and that's pretty much it. So I've got everything organized about the way I want it. The thing I'm going to do now, and this is going to be real quick, is I'm going to start putting some of this, not acrylic, this is just vinyl tubing. So this vinyl tubing is going to be what I'm using to connect all my water components, or water cooling components. And this is just a bit of 3/4 by 5/8 inch tubing, which I may have grabbed the wrong size, and it looks like, yeah, I definitely grabbed the wrong size yet again. It's 5/8 by 1/4, or 5/8 by 1/2. That's what I need. Damn. So I gotta go get new tubing, which I will do tomorrow. So I've gotten a little bit of tubing. I again managed to buy the wrong stuff, so I've got to go buy the right stuff now. But that'll be a thing for tomorrow, because it's getting late and I don't feel like going out again. But so if you haven't done anything with liquid cooling before, it's fairly simple, as long as, of course, you buy the right tubing. But everyone makes a few mistakes here or there. Luckily enough, I keep my receipts, so I can always go back if I need to. So simple enough, what you do is, if you're going to use something like a compression fitting like this is a fairly common type. There are 2 types that you can get. There's the barbed fittings, which are just basically the end's going to look something like that, but it's going to be a bit more flared out at the ends, and it's going to be a lot tighter fit, so you're not going to have to use anything except for a little clamp to go on it to keep it tight. I'm not a big fan of those because they're not, in my opinion, super secure. I'm a huge fan of compression fittings though, because this is the kind of stuff that you use in a lot of places around your house, like a water supply valve for your toilet, for example. A lot more water pressure there than like the 20 psi or something I'll get from this. So I would really expect that this is going to be, these are a lot better than a barb fitting. Now barb fittings will work, I just don't trust them as much as I trust a good old compression fitting. So back to what you do. So if you have your compression fitting, you get your, first you get your little collar that you're going to slide onto your tubing, and then you take your fitting, slide that onto your tubing, like so. Once it's on there, all you do is put your collar in there and screw that down, which I'm having a hard time doing with one hand for some reason, and probably some screwing it the wrong way. There we go. So you do that, you get it down there good and tight. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to tighten it down with a wrench. I wouldn't recommend tightening it down with a wrench in most cases, but if it's in a spot where you can't really get to it that well with your fingers, or you don't have real good hand strength, then yeah, go ahead and use a wrench of some kind. But mostly you don't need it. You can just do by hand and you'll be okay, as long as your cut is nice and flush on your tubing. Which brings me to my next point. When you are cutting your tubing, it's best to use something, either cutters like this, or you can get some ratcheting ones that are meant for PVC or flexible tubing, which work really well as well. Honestly, you could even use just household scissors, but you want to make sure that you get a nice flush cut when you do it. And the reason for that is if you get an angled cut and you try to put your fitting on, which I'll make a junky cut on this. So if I make a nice janky cut, and say you got something like that, and you try to get that on there, you're never going to get it on there, and it's going to leak every time. So best thing to do, be real careful, use the right tools, and all you got to do is use, if you use these, it's super easy. You put it in the channel, click it down, and you'll get a real flush cut every time. There's a little bit of variance there, probably because I put that 45-degree angle on it, but yeah, it's still a real flush cut there, and that'll definitely not be a problem as far as getting leaks, because you can see that fits tightly all the way around. So good stuff. Another thing I would highly recommend, especially if you're going to be using a lot of tubing that's going to be tightly bent, is kink coil. In the event that you need to use some tight bends in your vinyl tubing, and especially if it's smaller vinyl tubing, you get this a lot as well. So let's say you have a bend that's kind of like that. If you go ahead and use this kink coil stuff, which you can either put it on ahead of putting your tubing in, which is the easiest way to do it, or once you start it, you can start putting it on, and then you just kind of wrap it around as you go. But either way, you just want to get it on there. So I'm getting it on there. I'm not doing anything dirty here. No, not. This is perfectly normal. Natural, even. Okay, great. So, kink coil is on. And what this will do for you, like I said, is if you make those real tight bends, this will prevent you from getting kinks. So you can make that tight bend. You'll notice it's not actually kinking except for in one little spot there. But if it is kinking in one spot, all you do is tighten up your coils, and then you can make that tighter bend without that problem. So it also does kind of make a nice aesthetic on your tubing as well. So when you have different colored stuff in there, but that's a good amount of bend that you can get there. And like I said, the more that you put on there, the more you'll be able to bend it without making a huge kink. And even there, you'll still get flow. So really good stuff to have, especially if you're working in a tight little area. And it comes off a lot easier. So one thing that I'm being particularly careful about with this is I want to make sure all my cables actually reach, especially my fans. So I've got a lot of different fan headers, so I won't really need a fan controller, which was a nice part of doing this. Because fan controllers kind of annoy me. I like having it regulated by software, because software I can control while the computer's running without having to play with displays, and I just don't like fan controllers that much. I like software ones better. They just make me happier. So what I'm going to end up doing is, as I've already routed the powers all over here, so I know that all three of these fans are good, and I've really only got 3 more fans, and I believe I've got at least 3 more chassis fans, or 3 more fan headers that I can plug stuff into, so I should be pretty good off here. So yeah, all we gotta do now is make sure that all my fittings are gonna work, or all my tube layout's gonna work, which is probably the next hardest thing that I have to do. I gotta put a few fittings on. So when you get things like a motherboard, or you get reservoirs, they typically don't come with fittings. So what you do is you'll have your water block, for example, for the CPU. It's what this is. And what you'll end up doing is you'll just either it's going to be a straight fitting like this where you just tighten it in, or it'll be this type of fitting where you screw it in, and it's going to be a complete bastard. I hate you right now. I hate you so much. Alright, I'm going to try a different one. I don't know why I was whispering. Because I could. There it goes. So these ones, angled ones, are a little bit more complicated because they got a little piece that you got to do in. But you know, I really like them from Coolants because they give me a little bit more flexibility. Coolants has a lot of good little liquid cooling products that I don't see from other groups. Like they do have some, like they're like detachable pieces where you can put them in and then they'll actually, you can like detach them, I guess would be the word that I was looking for. Like you can, they're quick disconnects, that's the word. So they're quick disconnects that you can use to, like if you were changing out your graphics card or something and you had those, you could quickly just unplug from those and then pull the graphics card out and do whatever you wanted to do and then put it back in with another one. Like if you're changing out a water block or something, which you don't do that often, but I guess it's cool. But yeah, so about that easy. Now I would recommend, if you're going to, or when you do put these fittings on, that you do give them a real brief turn with a wrench. This one I can't do anything like that with. I'll have to get pliers to do it because it doesn't have a flat spot. But most fittings, you'll notice they have a flat spot, 2 flat spots for a wrench. Just adjust your wrench to however you need it and give it just a little turn. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. You don't want to just really mash these in there because then you'll screw up your threads and it'll be a bad day. Next up is I started to draw out where I'm going to make my cuts on the back piece. So if you're wondering how that's going to work, I did my cuts here for the motherboard input and output section. So basically I've got a nice rectangle drawn out on the wood, and I'm going to use a jigsaw or a bandsaw depending on how I can fit that in there. I prefer to use bandsaw. They're a little bit more accurate for me to use than a jigsaw, but if I can use the bandsaw, I'll use that. Otherwise, I use a jigsaw, and I'll just make a nice cut where I'm going to pull that piece out. And same thing with the power supply. What I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to make a cut big enough to slide the whole thing forward through the board. Because notice this is about 1 inch, or yeah, it's about 1 inch thick. So I mean, in reality, they say 1 inch, but it's closer to about 7/8 of an inch, something like that. But that's still a good size gap. So I'm going to actually push that all the way to the limit of that, and what I'm going to do to hold it into place once I get it through, because obviously it could just, you know, be pushed back in, is I'm going to put a nice little bracket right here, an angle bracket that I can screw in, and that'll prevent it from coming back. I'm not super worried about it coming out because it's going to be held in by the wires, so I'm most likely just going to leave it like that, or I might put a bracket on there, or a piece of little bracing piece of metal on the outside as well to hold that in place. But you know, it's kind of up in the air how I'm going to do that exactly. We'll see when I get to that point, but I have a plan. So I've got that worked out. I've also traced out where I'm going to put my USB plugins over there. So I've got those set up, and the only things left to do to trace out is going to be my graphics card, which I can do right now. So I'm going to take my pencil, and you're going to angle it in a little bit because you're not going to be able to get it perfectly up where you need it to be, but you're going to angle it down a little bit so that it's closer to where you need to be. So I know it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, right, the way I explained it, but if you do it yourself, you'll see what I mean, but you'll want to angle down the pen a little bit so you get to where you need to be. Alright, so the way I'm going to attach my graphics card is I'm actually going to cut it where the bracket is, where you would normally stick out of the case with it, and then I'm going to use the screw holes that's already on it, and I'm going to screw into the side, and that's going to hold it in place. So that's going to be the main thing, holding it in, bracing it. I may also put the same thing like I'm using with the power supply. I may also put in a nice 90-degree angle bracket here, and I'll just have that keeping it from pushing back in. So that's pretty much it for that. The motherboard, that's going to be held in by standoff, so I don't have to worry about that part too much. But yeah. Now, the motherboard I actually am okay with marking it the way I marked it. I gave it, you know, the same amount of room because the standoffs are going to push it up a little bit. So, that's how I actually want it to sit. So that'll be perfectly good. The only other thing that I'm going to have to worry about a little bit now is the fans. So I'm going to have to put some fans in the back. Right now I'm looking at putting one on the right side, right about there, if I can not put my head in the way while I point to it. And then on the other side over here, I'm going to put another fan, and that's going to, or two more fans over there, both 120 millimeters. So I'm going to have 320 millimeter fans pushing air out. I'm going to have 320 millimeter fans pulling the air in, and 180 millimeter fan pulling, or not 180, 160 millimeter fan that's going to be pulling air up through this radiator as well. So that should give me basically a decent little bias of, you know, one and a third to 1. So I should have more in than out. So that'll give me that positive pressure I'm looking for. Not quite like a 2 to 1, but it'll be exactly what I'm looking at. I'm looking for as close to even as I can get without going too crazy out of the way. The other thing is these 3 fans right here are actually real beefy fans. So I'm fairly certain they're going to do exactly what I want. I've also got another big beefy fan. These are high amperage fans, so they do an amazing job at just shredding air through things. They are super powerful, and they will rip your damn finger off. I have all my digits, but these are scary. As you can see, this is a much thicker fan, and these are much thicker blades. They're monsters. They will shred your hand up, but they are great fans, and I would highly recommend them. Basically what I'm looking at for my loop is I've got my pump over on this side. I'm going to pump all the water out, and it's going to go through the radiators first. It doesn't matter what order things go in. Some people think it matters. It doesn't, because as it turns out, all the water in your loop is going to be the same temperature. Water is a really good thermal conductor, so don't think of it in terms of it's going from the pump to the radiators and it's at its coolest point, you know, over here while it's coming out of the last radiator. That's not true. It's all the same temperature. It's just warming up and cooling down at the exact same rate. So all the water is really the same temperature no matter where it is in the loop. At any rate, I'm actually going to be looking at if I can make these tubes fit, and I'm pretty sure this will work the way I want it to, but I'm not 100%, so let's find out. So now that I have a good view, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start piecing together where these parts are going to be. Before I trace out my radiators and everything, I need to get the tubing all situated. Yeah, I'm not going to put the fittings on or anything yet. I'm mostly just making sure that everything is properly placed so that I can get all of the tubing where I need it to be before I go ahead and start messing with other stuff. And I want to make sure it's not too tall. So right now this is too high of a run, and I'm going to cut this down a little bit more. And don't worry, these bits of tubing will not go to waste. I have plans for all of them. So this is kind of what I'm talking about, is I want to make sure that I get this tubing to the point where it's stretched out enough that it will be where I need it to be, and stretched out enough that it's not going to be too high up and get in the way of the top of the case, top of the desk, I should say. And I don't want it to be crushed down so much that it's impeding the flow. So that means I got to make sure that these are the proper distance from each other. So I can also make these fans move out of the way now. So this is kind of what I'm looking at doing. And once I've figured out where I want stuff to be, for example, I know I want this one to be here, and I'm going to use this radiator here as a reference point pretty much. I'm going to, am I going to do that? Yeah, that's how I'm going to do it. So now that I know that, I'm basically going to put this right here, and I'm going to draw my outline of the radiator. And what that's going to do for me is it's going to let me know what I need to cut. Now I'm not going to cut a hole that size because that would clearly be stupid. But what I am going to do is I'm going to flip that over and use a hole saw to in the exact center. And the hole saw is going to be 120 mil size. It's actually 118 millimeter, which is fine for my purposes. But that will leave a hole, which will allow the air to come through, which is the same size hole as the fan. The fan blade itself, it's a circle, so perfect. It'll make a nice, perfect round hole as well. I don't have to use the. I won't have to use the jigsaw, because trying to cut a circle with a jigsaw is a pain. Also, trying to cut a square in the middle of wood is kind of a pain. So much easier to just go ahead and use the hole saw. So now that I've got this back into alignment, once I get it back into alignment, she was right about yonder. Yep, good. Alright, that's back where I need it. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to move this in, looks like. Get the fans out of the way. Alright, so I'm going to move this in and get the tubing attached. There we go. And again, I'm going to move this out to a place that makes sense, which looks like and right about there. So that's the spot that I'm going to mark for this radiator. Alright, so now that I've got these radiators marked, or these areas marked for the radiators rather, now that I've got those marked off where I need them, now what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to find the center point for each of these areas. And once I find that, I'm going to go ahead and draw a crossed line where I can know where to hole saw. So, be right back with that. Alright, so I got my tape measure now, so now we can do the measurements. And I'm going to move this tubing out of the way. So, what we're going to do here is we're going to measure to find the center point. We're going to measure up, and we've got 5 or 4.5 about, no, be about 4 5/8. So we got about 4 5/8 here of an inch to find the center point. So what we need to do is figure out where the center of that's going to be. So if 4 5/8 is the total, it's going to be 2 and some number of 16ths. This is going to suck. So I guess we'll look at how about 2 and 2.5 will be a little bit too much. 2 3/8 will be a little bit too less. So let's do 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2 and 7/16. So I'll do 2 and 7/16 should be somewhere about close. And now we'll do the same thing on the bottom side. And that's going to require me to move over this direction. Whew. So, looks like we've got a total this direction of, let's see, 5. Well, since the top portion of this is a radiator, I know it's going to be pretty much the exact same measurement, so I'm going to just find the same midway point, 2 and 5/16. There we go. And then from there, I'll just extrapolate my line, just freehand as best as I can. And there we go. So I know that this spot here is my center point, and that's where I'm going to put my my hole for the fanning. Don't really have to erase this because I'm just going to paint over anyway, but just for clearness, you know, that's what I like to do. So, that being done, we're going to do the same thing on the opposite side, and we're going to find where the fans are going to go by doing this. So I've got my center points for the fans. That's where I'm going to drill the holes, and yeah, that'll be pretty simple right there. I'm actually going to put one of these heftier fans over on this side, blowing out, because it's going to be the most beneficial. So I'm going to do the same exact thing, trace along the board, and I'm putting all my fans on the back because I would like the heat to exhaust away from my body, because I'm not a big fan of the computer making me warm. So I'm going to go ahead, get that, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing using the other fans that I'll be putting on the back. So there we go, there's my two fans there. And basically, I'm not going to bore you with the measurements. Let's give you the same idea. Basically, going from the center points here, it is a lot easier to tell on these. I'm actually not going to have to measure it. I'm just going to take two lines. I'm going to use a square that I have that's it's a straight edge basically. And I'm just going to go from the center point of these, the longest two spots, and find where they intersect. And that's where I'm going to drill my hole. And that's about as easy as it gets. That's pretty much it for today. I'm not going to do a whole lot of work tonight as far as cutting. I just have everything ready to cut. Alright, so we've got a lot done so far. The work has really been going by pretty quickly. I've seen things really start to develop, but it's going to come together a lot quicker now once I start actually cutting everything out and start screwing all the pieces together, which is going to be the next step. So next up, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show everybody how we're going to screw and glue the side panels to the base board, and from there I'm also going to do all the cutouts, and as well as the hole saw parts of it where I'm going to make space for the fans. So thanks for sticking with me through this. Haven't got any negative comments yet. If you want to leave some negative ones, go ahead, I guess. I don't really mind, I can take it. But appreciate all the support I've gotten so far. Thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe. It really helps me out, helps me get more people to see the videos, and helps me, I don't know, make more stuff for you, I guess, in the long run. So, mash that like and subscribe button is a thing that people say sometimes. I'll just say, you know, click it once or so if you like it. That'd be good. And, yeah, see you next time.